he had to actually take a baby out of the oven. There's no support for that at all from an Islamic perspective. We're all members of one human family, and we all share this planet as one home.
It's insane that we're in this sort of matrix reality where we think that we need to fight each other.
You look in the comments and people are clapping. People are like, yeah, kill them, do this, do that.
We're the most conscious species, but also the most destructive species on this planet. We're the most aware of the destruction that we are very much so creating.
We're the most informed, we have the most information at our disposal, but we seem to be the least curious.
And if you look at the end goal of Muslims, it's to create oneness in this world. And if you look at the end goal of Jews, it's to create oneness in this world. We actually have the same goal.
We have to do a better job of making clear the distinction between different movements with members who are Muslim and what Islam is. If both sides would look at their knowledge sources with sober minds and clear hearts, they would be able to find solutions.
Jews, Israelis, Palestinians, Muslims, Arabs, all of us in the region, we realize that we are not the ones profiting from this war, we're the ones suffering from this war. We have much more to profit and to benefit from a unity in the region.
We have to actually make the effort to get to know one another.
I'm super excited about this conversation. We got Rudy Rochman here. Pleasure to finally be in your presence officially. I know everything's been over the phone or via social media. And then Rashad, this is my first time meeting you.
Yes.
Rashad Abdul Rahman. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes,
I want to make sure that I'm
good.
putting respect on it. But I really appreciate both of you gentlemen coming, considering, again, where we're at, the climate, the times that we're in. And I think we can have a powerful conversation about unity and healing. You know, I know that we have a difference of opinions as well as a difference of information, but the purpose, at least for me and my vision, is to show that we can have these types of conversations and we can get, you know, different walks of life in the room and be able to discuss and to do it in a way that sets the example so that other people can see that. I'll start with you, Rudy, and just let you give a background about you and all of the amazing work that you're doing.
Well, first of all, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa
I know we already met before, but just greetings. Thank you for creating this space, for bringing information to the table, for us to realize that everyone's holding on to a piece of the truth.
Yep.
And it's important to bring that truth together.
Absolutely.
Rather than to use them as weapons against each other.
Absolutely.
A lot of the work that I do is to move my people forward.
Mm-hmm.
I'm part of an ancient civilization called the Nation of Israel. The Jewish people, different names during different times. And there are many things that are plaguing my people today. Of course, there's movements of anti-Semitism that we've had to face for generations. There's also a lack of empowerment for the younger generation. We're taught to practice Judaism, but not how to put Judaism into practice.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lack of vision and direction of where we need to go, what we need to do as a collective. I don't think that Jews are just supposed to be good individuals. I think we have a role and a mission statement to do in this world and to use Israel as a vessel to be able to achieve that. I would also say that there's, of course, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That's a problem. And the Jewish people have a mission statement of doing tikkun olam and ol hagoyim, to heal the world and to empower other nations. Well, how about we do tikkun babayim b'nei dodim, meaning why don't we heal our own home with our own cousins before even thinking of the rest of the world and other people?
Right.
And I think Israel has the power, thus the responsibility to fix that situation. And lastly, a big part of my mission is finding all the different communities that are part of the Nitchei Yisrael, the dispersed of Israel, part of the tribes of Israel that need to be reunited. Today's Jewish community of about 15, 16 million are really the descendants of 2.5 tribes out of 12. There's 9.5 tribes that are still displaced, disconnected, and not lost because they know who they are, but lost to our consciousness. And my role is to bring them back to the greater consciousness of our generation and to reunite that family.
No, that's amazing. That's amazing. What about you, my brother?
I also want to begin by extending gratitude to you, Brother Josh, for having me on. What we know is that nothing is in our plan. Everything is in the plan of our Creator. That's our position as Muslims and as persons of faith in general. And then also Rudy for being willing to engage in this discussion. Out of the things that I do, I think most relevant for this discussion, my work here locally in the Atlanta area is as one of the imams, assistant imam at the Atlanta Masjid of Al-Islam. And we are the largest African-American congregation of Muslims in the United States.
Okay.
And what makes our congregation quite unique is that we actually stem from the movement that was once called the Lost Found Nation of Islam in the Wilderness of North America. Many Americans or many people on the globe, they're familiar with personalities such as El-Hajj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, definitely. Perhaps in more recent times, Minister Louis Farrakhan. They all are members or were members of this movement. In 1975, upon the passing of Elijah Muhammad, or the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, his son at the time, who was Minister Wallace Muhammad, eventually he became Imam Warithuddin Muhammad. He led the largest mass conversion of Muslims in modern time. That was my parents, my peers, that was their parents. The Nation of Islam at that time was a separatist movement. We had a theology, we had a mythology, we had an overarching philosophy that was quite different from that of Muslims across the world. So when Imam Muhammad became the leader, one of the dominant focuses that he took up was to establish al-Islam in America, but according to its classical expression, as it was started with our Prophet Muhammad, praise and peace be upon him. A component of that work was he led us down the road of engaging in what became known as interfaith dialogue. I mean, most of us come from a Christian background, so all of my cousins, my grandparents, we're Christian people, either Baptists or Methodists or something like that from the South. And at the same time, we have neighbors who are non-Muslim. So we have been doing work for several decades now, engaging various communities, including our Christian brothers and sisters, our Jewish brothers and sisters, and others. The reason why that's relevant for this discussion is because a part of my work in continuing in that tradition, along with other leaders who are part of my community, we have been, prior to October 7th and even after, we have been in the work of engaging leaders from the Jewish community. I just returned, as I was sharing before the cameras went on, we just returned about a week or more ago from Morocco, a delegation of Muslim American imams and a delegation of rabbis from Jerusalem, part of the Blickley Institute. And we've been engaging in interfaith dialogue for a while. And we registered the pressing need for us to come to an understanding of one another. Just unique to be here at this time because we just got back from that, which was part 2 of another trip, which we were in Israel, which in the crescendo of that trip was our being present in Jerusalem, the holy city that all of these 3 Abrahamic faith traditions recognize and see as their holy land. So this is the right time for this type of discussion. I'm grateful to be here to contribute to it.
No, for sure. And that's beautiful, with everything that y'all have going on. A little backstory, though, for those that'll be able to see this, like, what was your inspiration behind you getting to this work?
So it starts already with my grandparents' generations.
Right.
All of my grandparents were born in different countries, and all their families were exterminated, and my grandparents themselves persecuted for being Jews in the lands that they were living in. My grandparents on my mother's side were born in North Africa, in Algeria and in Morocco. They were living in a village called Oujda, and there was a massacre of their Jewish community in 1948, which doesn't represent all Arabs, all Muslims, all Moroccans, nor the government. But unfortunately, after that situation, they had to flee, and they ended up in France. On my father's side of the family, they were survivors of the Holocaust. My grandmother had to hide in a nunnery, and my grandfather in an attic to survive the Holocaust. So growing up, I realized that, okay, I was second generation now, born in France, left when I was 3 to Israel, 5 to Miami, constantly moved around my entire life. And in Miami, it's a very non-American city. You're Argentinian, Venezuelan, Colombian, Haitian, Jamaican, Cuban, Dominican, always labeled as something else. And whenever I would be in school, I was labeled the French kid, even though that's not really where my ancestors come from.
Right.
And I left when I was 3, and none of my grandparents are from there. Whenever I'd visit my family in France, I was the American cousin, and I didn't even have a U.S. passport, and I just came here. It's not really my land or my history either. And I was kind of fed up of having to answer who I am or where I'm from, depending on who's asking me the question or where the question was being asked. And something happened to me as a 7-year-old that just changed my life, gave me that answer, and also set me on the path of what I do today. I took a trip to London with my mom and my younger brother. I was 7, my brother was 5, and we got onto the red double-decker tour bus of London. And my mom was wearing a shirt in Hebrew that said Emet, which means truth. And we got onto the bus, and the bus driver, who ends up being a neo-Nazi, sees my mom's shirt and says, "Excuse me, is that written in Jewish?" My mom says, "No, it's written in Hebrew, but it's the language of the Jewish people. Maybe it's just an ignorant question." He's like, "Oh, so you guys are Jews?" She says, "Yeah, we're Jews. What's the problem?" He's like, "Get off my bus. I don't want any Jews here." And my mom said, "Absolutely not. I don't know who you think you are. We're not getting off this bus." And the man got up, grabbed my mom, and threw her off. And I remember there was a woman right in front of us with her 2 kids. She happened to be black from the south of the U.S. And me and my brother were playing with them because we were similar age. And she had gone onto the bus beforehand. And when she saw that, she got up and started yelling and got help. Eventually, police came. The guy got arrested. But for me, that moment changed my life. First of all, it made me promise that the next time I would deal with any sort of injustice, especially if it's an attack against my collective, I'd have to be prepared emotionally, physically, verbally, intellectually, even ideologically, understanding why these things are happening to begin with. And the second thing is it taught me who I was, because I realized it didn't matter where I was born, grew up, lived in, traveled to, reside in, what passport I have, where my parents or grandparents are born, what I believe in or don't believe in. I realized I'm a Jew. And I started asking myself deeper questions. What does it mean to be a Jew? Is this just this religion?
Yep.
Well, a religion, if you don't believe in the belief system, you're not a part of it. And in Judaism, even if you don't believe in the fundamental parts, which is in Hashem and in the Torah, you're still a Jew, even though it's a fundamental part of who we are. So I realized that being a Jew is the descendant of an ancient civilization and ancient people that have this spirituality and this belief and emunah in Hashem and God at our core, but we are a nation and a civilization from this land. And I realized that in the Torah, we're actually never called Jews. We're either called Am Yisrael, the nation of Israel, Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, or in Arabic, Bani Israel, or Ivrim, Hebrews. And so I'm asking myself, why am I even called a Jew if I'm from the tribe of Levi from both sides of my family? I'm not even from the tribe of Judah, which is where the word Jew comes from. I realized that the name of the land 2,000 years ago when the Romans had conquered it, because at that point it had split into two kingdoms after King Solomon, the land that my ancestors were living in was the land of Judea. And just because we came from a land called Judea, we, all of us, even though we're not all from the tribe of Judah, started calling ourselves as Judeans or Jews or Yehud. From there I realized, okay, if the land today is called Israel, and that's actually the name of my entire nation, including my tribe, then I'm an Israelite, and I'm Israeli. And it's a synonym for being a Hebrew, or the children of Israel, the nation of Israel, or Jews. For me, it's all synonyms of the same people. And that started my path to waking up and realize I need to play a role to move our people forward.
Oh, that's powerful. That's powerful. Rashad, what about you? What got you on this path that you're on?
It sort of grew organically just from my life. I mean, I think that my life was a typical African-American male's life.
Right.
South side of Chicago, born and raised. Again, my parents were members of the Nation of Islam, so it wasn't typical in the sense that we were raised a little bit differently. No pork. Sort of those cliche things, that everyone knows about Black Muslims within Black America. But as I got older, I was able to really see the stark contrast between myself, my family, and those who didn't have our lifestyle. Coming from Islam, the perception of how we should view our life in Islam, I believe that is missing. It's missing amongst a lot of Muslims, a lot of African Americans. And I think that just from my contact with that, the experience in and of itself impressed upon me what I would call a certain spirit to do the work of really promoting the correct message of al-Islam in the world. And
what do you feel is that correct message, if you don't mind me asking?
No, yeah, that's actually good. The correct message of al-Islam, at the base of it are several fundamentals. All of us, all people of faith have perhaps, though the majority have perhaps forgotten. Number one, we believe in the oneness of God. I think that's a common assumption. But what stems from the oneness of God is the sacred value of human life and how religion is not to be identified primarily in rituals, in these sort of external exercises. But these external exercises are all centered around something more crucial. And that crucial thing is what we see when every baby is born. Unlimited potential, progress unlimited in the potential of every child of Adam, Bani Adam. We have the expression Bani Israel. We also have Bani Adam. We are all the descendants of Adam. And no nation, no magisterium, no anything that is constructed upon lack of respect for the human essence is legitimate in the eyes of al-Islam. So Muslims have forgotten that. We believe that Christians have forgotten. We believe that's a forgotten principle. And then obviously there are other details that stem from that. The message of al-Islam is essentially on the sacred value of human life and how the community of mankind in all of its various expressions should be ordered to complement and accommodate the excellence of human life in its original purity and innocence as Allah made it, as God made it.
Yeah. Oh, that's powerful. In regards to, because when I hear both of you speak, there's talks of unity and love and, just all these beautiful things. In regards to October the 7th, this date in history, and we're all sitting on, not just you two, but even myself, we're all sitting on different sides of it. What is your take? I'll start with you, Rashad, your understanding of how October the 7th even came to be.
How it came to be, I think, is a little bit more complex from the Muslim side.
Right.
But the nature of October 7th, in and of itself, as a date and as an occurrence in world history, really, in our view, from an Islamic perspective, the taking of innocent life, going back to what I just said about the sacredness of human life, the taking of the life of non-combatants, the taking of the life of women, children, this is not the teachings of our prophet, Muhammad. So it's absolutely forbidden. One of the rabbis, he shared with us how after the attack, he told his son, you have to go fight. His son went to go fight. He said he came back a few months later and he had a son. His son had a son. At the actual birth, his son just broke down crying and he asked him why. He said because when he went to the areas, they had to do, I don't know the correct language, but it was like cleanup. That's our common American talk. He had to actually take a baby out of the oven, and here is his son being born. So he couldn't hold it in. So there's no support for that at all from an Islamic perspective. We're an association of communities, as I explained earlier, coming out of the Nation of Islam, but we are in what's considered, I guess, Orthodox Islam. We were some of the first communities to issue statements of condemnation and really articulating what I'm saying right now, that this is un-Islamic behavior. So that's October 7th. The leading up to, I would say, is a much more complex question or matter, because I shared with the rabbis, I said, well, as a Muslim, I'm saying what I just said here. But as a member of the African American experience, as an example, one of our heroes is Nat Turner. And Nat Turner actually did something very similar. He gathered a small group, a small band of slaves, and they decided to go after not white men. They went after men, women, and children. I had never even thought about it in this measure until these discussions and reflections that we began to have about October 7th. Right. He did not discriminate either. And in his mind, he felt justified. And as members of the African American community, we actually see him as a hero. Yeah. You have Nat Turner shirts and all of that. You have others like Denmark Vesey and then other lesser known figures. So taking a step back, being juxtaposed between these two histories, I guess I would say knowledge contexts. I'm a Muslim following the Quran and the tradition of our prophet and the best of the teachers in Islam. And at the same time, I'm a member of this group that has been put down, to say the least. I'm able to look at two angles. The reconciliation of looking at it in these two angles, I really find it in the Islamic sources. While it's an absolute must to condemn and to actually put a stop to inhumane treatment of other human beings, savagery, etc., as was demonstrated on that day. As humans who are humanly sensitive, every one of us may not be able to do it. We may be too sensitive at the moment to do it, but we have to ask, especially for the purpose of reconciliation, we have to ask the critical question of how did they get there? When they came from their mother's womb, they weren't in that direction. Something put them on that trajectory. That's a difficult thing to do, but I do believe that that's absolutely necessary if we're going to get to the root of the problem. And in the Muslim mind, or I would even say more than just the Muslim mind, in the mind of the Arab world, there are hurts, there are embarrassments, and then there's just cultural ways about them. The Arabs are a very proud people. So all of that is working in the mind of these people, and it influences their thinking. And from our view, from a more sober perspective, it has even deformed their ability to think clearly. But again, for the purpose of healing, it's not enough to just say they're deformed. How do we fix it? How do we address it? So perhaps not in this generation, but the next generation or generations after. How can they not be deformed? You see what I'm saying?
No, for sure. And one thing I want to point out before you speak about it, Rudy, is I think it's important not just for the Jewish community to hear that, but just people. Because the unfortunate part is you have people that aren't necessarily Muslim or Jewish. You got people that's trying to choose sides, especially like me being an American and being here and scrolling on social media and seeing the comments whenever posts come up and seeing how people are, if you're on this side, then they're going to condemn you. So just from the standpoint of you even just speaking to that, I feel, me personally, is very powerful because that's out there. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And for somebody that thinks otherwise, it's important for them to hear it. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, and I appreciate your answer. And Rudy, I'll kick it over to you.
I'd like to touch first on the concept of oneness that you touched on before going into October 7th. You know, we learn about Judaism, Islam, and Christianity as monotheistic religions. And I think it's actually wrong because monotheism is the belief in one individual God. You look at polytheism, it's the belief in many different gods, and monotheism, saying, no, this God is just one individual, one object. Mm. And I think the similarity within Islam and Judaism is that we say, no, it's not one individual God, it's that God is oneness, which is actually more panentheism. It's time, space, universe, everything combined. The infinite, this oneness all combined, is what Hashem, Allah is. And I think there's a lot more similarities between Judaism and Islam than within Christianity. In fact, as Jews, we cannot pray in a church, but we can pray in a mosque. Because in a mosque, there's no idols, there's no belief in an object being God. It's the understanding that oneness is God. And even in our temple in Jerusalem, we've always believed that anyone who believes in oneness can come and pray, not just those who follow Judaism and in our prophet Moses. So there's a lot of similarities there to be built upon, and I think it's time for more Jews and Muslims to start uniting, to start having these conversations, to start understanding that we are all an extension of this oneness that we come from. In terms of October 7th, it's not an easy conversation to be had. I live in Israel. As an Israeli, I got out of the army in 2013. I served as a paratrooper, and when I finished my army, a lot of my work was dedicated towards uniting Israelis and Palestinians, for which for many years I've been reaching out to different community leaders, not those who are in the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, but if you look at the Palestinian society, the true leaders are the patriarchs of that one family in each village that runs the family. And so we bring these individuals with local Jewish leaders, because I don't have faith in any of the politicians on either side to correct this problem, to build relations, to understand what is our history, what have been our struggles, what are our aspirations, what can we create that allows us to move forward by bringing the aspirations of both populations together, which I do not believe are mutually exclusive, and ending the injustices that both communities face, which are horrible on both sides and in no way a competition. And so that's a lot of my work. But unfortunately, on October 7th, I happened to be with my family being prepared to celebrate a wedding. It was Shabbat, so the whole family was united. My family had come from France and the US, and we're all together. And my mom wakes me up at around 8 in the morning, knocks on my door, and has tears in her face. And my mom's the strongest woman that I know, and she starts showing me videos and pictures of what the world has seen and what the world was just starting to see at the time, of soldier bodies being dragged through the streets of Gaza, which even if you're at war, you shouldn't desecrate a human body. Hamas going through the streets of Sderot, just shooting civilians up, individuals in the festival running for their lives. And the moment I saw this, we're not new to this idea of terrorism or war, unfortunately, in the Middle East, but this was something different that I think my generation at least had never seen. And so the moment I saw this, I knew that I'd probably get called back up to war. I'm a reservist, which means that at any moment, if there's a war in Israel, I get called back. I've been out of the army for 10 years, and I've been doing everything that I can do to prevent us from getting to war. Because a lot of people use very loaded terms and are very extreme, but they're not the ones who's going to be on the front lines. Me and my friends are going to be. So I'm doing everything that I can to prevent us from being there, because I know what it looks like. Maybe 30, 40 minutes later, after I woke up, I got a call from my commander, told me to come back to base. Drove to my apartment in Jerusalem. I live in Jerusalem. Took my equipment, went to the base, got on my uniform. They gave us guns. And at 4 p.m., they put us onto Hummers. They didn't tell us where we would go. You would think that reserves, you would change the active duty soldiers that are on the borders, and we would take over the control of the borders, and then they would go into war. But they just started driving us south. And I remember we passed a police checkpoint, and we just saw all the police officers just applauding us. And that's when it hit us that we're being sent to fight Hamas right now, right on this day. We started driving more south, and that's the moment where you could see all sorts of horrible things. And if someone doesn't have ears for hearing graphic stories, then I hope that they can understand that I have to share what I experienced. But there were bodies that were burned to the crisp, frozen in time. And there were cars flipped over, men, women, children dead on the roads. And we took a left into a community that's called Kfar Aza. I wasn't familiar with this place, but it's one of the hardest hit communities on October 7th. And we went inside, and every single person that they could have killed, they killed in the most gruesome of ways. Women were raped, babies were killed. A lot of the world tries to deny this, but I saw it with my own eyes. So it's not like I'm sharing a narrative of what my side is saying. I'm telling you what I saw with my own eyes. Yeah. And no one was prepared to see such trauma, such horrible situations. Even as soldiers that you're raised to be ready to fight as warriors in the case to save life, you're not prepared to see such things. For 2 days we were there, and eventually Hamas was removed. All those that had run away went back into Gaza, and we were able to clear the area, save the remaining civilians that were still hiding. And there's this unit called Zaka, which I believe probably the son of that rabbi is a part of. It's a unit that gathers the bodies after these situations. And I remember them taking one body after another body after another body, and they have these sort of ambulance looking trucks, and on the back there's a glass window, and I could see all the stacked up bodies to the top each time a car would go by. The amount of deaths that we saw is not something I think anyone should ever have to face or to deal with. And something that really marked me that I'm going to carry is there was one of these soldiers from Zaka comes out of the house with a small bag, which is the body of a baby, and there was still knives sticking out of it. And if you're fighting warrior versus warrior, military versus military, soldier versus soldier, that's one thing. But to go and to just create as much death to civilians and also make as much pain in the process. They raped women in front of their husbands, then chopped their heads off and threw it in front of them and made them live with that. They didn't just want to kill people, they wanted to scar people for life. I agree with you that this absolutely does not represent Islam or Arabs or my Palestinian cousins. And I call them cousins because 30 to 60% of Palestinians genetically descend from Jews. And if you go to places like Yatta and Yafo and Haifa and Safed and Hebron and Shem and Bethlehem and Beit El and all these places where are ancient Jewish civilizations, and you have Palestinians, Arabs who still live there, some of them are mixed cities, some of them only Palestinians live there, 80 to 90% of their ancestors are actually Jews. So we have much more in common. First of all, we're cousins with the rest of the Arab world as Bani Ibrahim, but even more so closer with Palestinians. So it's insane that we're in this sort of matrix reality where we think that we need to fight each other. And so that's October 7th, but I agree, it didn't come out of nowhere. At the same time, to be critical onto my side, for 18 years, we've known that Hamas has taken over and has been educating their population to wanting to kill Jews and doing so in the name of Islam. After October 7th, I was sent into Gaza, spent 2 months in Khan Yunis, and I have 3 suitcases full of propaganda of how children are taught from a young age to contextualize their worldview by Israel and the Jewish people. The Yahud are the source of all of our problems, and the way to be an honorable person in life is by killing Jews, which again is not Palestinians to me, is not Arabs to me, is not Muslims to me, is not the Quran. So unfortunately, that's something that has taken place. Even though I don't think that Israel created the conflict, can't blame the conflict only on one side, it does today have the power to heal it and to solve it. And I think that's something that the Israeli government has failed to do. Of course, the government, due to its structure, which is completely broken in my opinion, focuses on short-term policies that give them quick returns to stay in election, because at any moment you can have a new election. So politicians can't even come into power thinking of what could we do to really solve problems on the long term. They're just thinking on the short term. And because of that, we have never solved the problems for Palestinians. And I think it's Israel's responsibility to get them out of that suffering. I would also touch that I don't think it's necessarily the right way of looking at the model of oppressor oppressed with the situation. Right. If we go to 48, the surrounding Arab countries had attacked Israel, and Israel was a newly founded country with Jews who had either lived there their entire lives or had just come out of the Holocaust or were being kicked out of different lands. And it's not the Western model of oppressor oppressed or good or evil. I think the majority of Palestinians and the majority of Jews / Israelis are good human beings and deserve a right to live together on this land united. I believe in the right of return for all the peoples who come from this land. That includes all Israelites and also Palestinians, because they will be fundamentally connected to this land eternally, just as my people are. If I want someone to understand me, I have to understand them as well. And I think where this all stems from, I'm going to go even before suffering and oppression and murder on both sides that has been taking place. Right. We can really go to its source, which in my opinion is the British. And wherever the British colonized, whether between India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, and Nigeria, bringing the Yoruba, the Hausa Fulani, and the Igbos into one country and creating these separations, their MO is always divide and conquer, to force the local peoples to fight each other so that they can maintain their control. And that's the same thing they did to the Israelis and to the Palestinians. They convinced my side and my grandparents' generation that Palestinians in the Arab world wanted to kill us all. And yes, there were individuals that represented that, but that's not the way of that people, nor the majority. And they convinced the Arab world and Palestinians that the Jews were just an extension of European colonialism, thus also experienced as their enemy, when really Jews are from Judea, Bani Israel are from Israel. We come from this land, we are Middle Easterners, and us coming back to that land was a return home, not creating a home elsewhere. And because we were taught to see each other's aspirations as mutually exclusive and experience each other's identities as a sort of triggering occurrence and sound, and would all of a sudden get us thinking that to be pro-Israel you have to be anti-Palestinian, and to be pro-Palestinian you have to be anti-Israel. I think if you're anti-either, you're anti-both, because there's no reality where either will disappear. So at some point we need to move past from that, heal from those previous generations, and I, inshallah, will be able to play my role in this generation, as others as well, to move us forward and realize that there is no other option than creating a reality on this entire land, undivided, that gives freedom from the river to the sea for all of us, and that fulfills the aspirations that both populations have, which in my opinion do not contradict.
That's powerful. Before I ask you both about what do solutions look like from both perspectives, can we get some clarity? Because I feel everybody, whether it be from social media or the news or whatever, just from both of you, in regards to Hamas, because some people feel Hamas represents the Palestinians, some people feel that it's a part of Allah, some people feel that they're different, that's on their own path. Like, what is the deal?
Hamas is an organization that began as a political framing amongst the Palestinian people. In other words, if I'm hearing your question correctly, this is not like a sect in Islam or a group of Muslims with a certain set of beliefs. It's not like a classical or traditional Muslim group. I believe they got started in the 80s. It was a political movement. Now, they have certain things in their charter, and correct me, I'm sure you're familiar with, perhaps more familiar than I am. They have certain things in their charter, such as how they view the Israeli people, or wiping Israel off the map, just to put it in sort of plain language. This is politics. These are not like the teachings of Islam.
Right.
So for viewers,
some people, that's why I wanted to clear it up, because that's the part that gets tricky. Islam will receive a lot of bad press because of what people might think or what's being put out there. So that's why I wanted to ask.
To look at it from one angle, the current state of Israel wasn't even in existence when the Prophet Muhammad came in the Quran 1400 years ago. So it can't be an authentic Islamic position of wiping the state of Israel off the map. You see what I'm saying? And it's not just from a timeline perspective. But the history is complex, but it's not complex in a bad way. It's like complex like a rich tapestry. It's an interwoven situation where you have had different groups occupying that land in that space. And what people tend to do, what human beings tend to do, they tend to conflate their political, economic, and other aspirations with their religious beliefs. That has even happened inside of Islam. So we have movements in Islam that started off political. They become theological. They just become so ingrained. But back to the Hamas question, no, it's a political organization that Israel has come to really not even see them as politically legitimate, but now it's a terrorist organization because of certain beliefs and activities. I'm hoping that that's clear for the audience. Now, a part of what makes this circumstances a bit more unclear is that non-Muslims say, well, we don't hear enough clear voices that are making it distinct that Hamas and Islam are not synonymous per se. Because most Muslim respondents speaking to this issue, be it on podcasts, be it on popular media, they go directly to the defense of Hamas, or another way to look at it, they go directly to what they see as the crimes of Israel and the West, but primarily Britain and America, in terms of their support for things that are understood as injustices meted out to the Palestinian people. I understand it. Just dealing with human beings, people naturally get on the defense. People want to be heard more than they want to listen. They want others to hear them, but they don't want to hear others. So these conversations are quite nuanced, and they require good sense. They require patience and respect, but they're not being had. So in these few minutes, everyone's just trying to fire off and get their point across. I think that on the Muslim side, we have to do a better job of making clear the distinction between different movements with members who are Muslim and what Islam is. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And then upon that basis, we can kind of have a more level-headed approach to what the issues are. I'll leave it there.
Mostly agree with what was just said. Hamas took over when Israel came out of Gaza around 2006. A lot of Israeli politicians were encouraging Hamas to take power because the previous political movements under Yasser Arafat, the PLO, terrorize and create intifadas and kill Jews. So Hamas originally was positioning itself as a more moderate party, a more moderate partner to potentially creating peace in the region. So many politicians were in support of that idea. The moment that Hamas took over, they killed all their opposition. All the members of the PA were killed and dragged through the streets. Today, if there's anyone who says anything different than what Hamas wants, they disappear. In fact, I have a friend who did a Zoom call with Israelis from Gaza, showing that we need to unite and educate each other, share each other's experiences, nothing to do even with politics. And he ended up being in prison for almost a year because of just doing a Zoom call. So there is no freedom of speech that exists for Palestinians under Hamas. And it's supposed to be a 4-year term, and they're on their 18th year of their 4-year term. So at this point, it's a dictatorship that is not only bad towards Jews and in their charter believes that they should kill Jews, but also bad to the Palestinians. And unfortunately, because there's so much pain on my side as well, it leads people to conclusions of thinking, oh, well, this is all Arabs, this is all Muslims, this is all Palestinians. Yep. But I would say also that most of those people don't really know Muslims, don't really know or have Palestinian friends. And when you don't have that experience of real human connections with other people and understanding the good that exists, you tend to come to these conclusions. I create a lot of content, and one of the videos that I did when I was in Gaza, unfortunately, I noticed that there were many Qurans that were occasionally on the floor. There were houses that blew up. A lot of the houses we went into were booby-trapped. I found several Qurans on the floor, and I made it a part of my mission to pick up every single one, to put it in a safe place, and to even salvage some of them, and brought it back to my Muslim friends in Israel for them to be able to reuse or put in a mosque or put it in whatever way. Because the way I saw it is if the situation was reversed and a Torah was found on the floor, I would definitely want someone to pick that up and to protect it. So I have to give that same energy that I expect. So yeah, Hamas does not represent the Palestinians, neither does the Palestinian Authority. Palestinian authorities, I think, on 20-something years of their 4-year term. And every time there was supposed to be an election, you see a a huge conflict sort of boil and reach the surface and erupt, and everyone forgets that there was actually supposed to be an election, and now everyone's focusing on the conflict. And I think we need to also have a conversation, if we're talking about the sources of where this comes from, as to who's truly benefiting from war. It's not Palestinians, it's not Israelis, not the people. I think it's politicians who are able to be elected, because if you provide security, you have to have a reality of insecurity in order to maintain power. Hamas and the Palestinian Authority as well, that are billionaires, and it's not because they invested in cryptocurrency at the right time, but all this aid that has poured in to help my Palestinian cousins have been invested in creating terror tunnels and weapons, and in making sure that they live a very luxurious lifestyle with billions in their accounts. And at the end, people are still suffering. And I will also say that there are other interest groups at play here. If you look at England, which at some point removed itself from the conflict, there were other countries who stepped in, for example, the US, that provides quote-unquote aid and weapons to both sides and to all sides of the conflict. And in my opinion, it's in their interest for war to continue, so that you can keep this military industrial complex and push foreign policy and position yourself in a way that you're really pro one side, but they're only pro the United States side.
Why did London remove themselves?
After World War II, you could see England retracting itself from a lot of places,
England, yeah.
just like they did so in Pakistan and India. It does still have heavy influence within Africa, and so does France and other countries that are still exploiting, and it's still colonization that's happening in their own ways. But I think the more modern form of colonization is less so planting a flag and having your soldiers, but making those militaries dependent on your country, which then allows you to push foreign policy. I'm very critical and against the U.S. foreign aid to Israel. I don't think it's actually aid. It's credit to buying weapons, but it comes with conditions that Israel cannot buy or sell any weapons or military technology to any other country without the approval of the United States. And if we look at in the 80s, when Israel was developing its fighter jet program called the Lavi program, for us to be independent and create our own jets, not to depend on outsourcing, America quickly came and shut that down. Now, if it was America's interest to make sure that Israel was strong and independent, why would you shut down our abilities to become independent and force us to become even more dependent? And in my opinion, it's in the interest of America, although this doesn't represent the American people or other parts of American culture. It's in the interest of how politicians have managed geopolitical moves within the Middle East to keep the conflict going. And once we wake up from that, Jews, Israelis, Palestinians, Muslims, Arabs, all of us in the region, we realize that we are not the ones profiting from this war. We're the ones suffering from this war. And we have much more to profit and to benefit from a unity in the region. And that's what I dedicate all of my energy to create.
And can I add to that? I think he's making a really good point.
No, of course.
That's a really, really good point. I forgot to mention, because Rudy mentioned how the British played a role with Israel in his formation. They did the same with Saudi Arabia. So we live in a time of Instagram. I mean, Insta means instant, and gram comes from grammar, and the two words are shortened. And that's where we are mentally. A lot of people just don't have the bandwidth anymore to really just sit and engage a topic and learn about it. That's what you have to do to really get a good hold on things. Western powers, they've backed up in terms of being physically present on these land masses, but in terms of their economic influence, politics is oftentimes used as a tool for economic interests. For example, after October 7th, there was a study done that showed many members of our government, the United States government, the Congress and the Senate, invested more in these defense companies who are involved in these contracts and these major deals, which is really unethical. It's unethical in any other industry or in any other field if moves like that are made. To just put it in common terms, there are selfish interests on the world stage that determine how foreign policy is carried out. Selfish actors, as he mentioned as well. If I'm not mistaken, the leaders of Hamas, they don't even live in Gaza. They're in Dubai, Abu Dhabi. I mean, they're literally living plush lives somewhere.
Oh, wow.
The average person doesn't know that.
Right.
As humans, we both can agree. You say, well, wait a minute, they don't even live there?
Yeah.
That's shocking. What most Muslims don't know, most Muslim nations stopped giving aid to Hamas. It was the United States that kept giving it.
When you said that, I was like, oh, okay. I didn't know that. I didn't realize the U.S. is funding both sides.
Yeah. And again, we want to make the distinction between the U.S. citizens and the U.S. government.
Oh, for sure.
And even in the U.S. government. But this has to be known that a lot of time, what we're actually influenced to do, we're actually influenced to see each other as the enemy. And oftentimes, what's that, the Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtain. We often forget about the man behind the curtain. We're just now, I believe, in a new time where we can make YouTube videos and it can reach the global public to help promote more transparency on what's really going on in the world. That's important, just like this conversation.
From both sides, what do you feel is a valuable solution?
I think it's a journey. And I think in order to get there, we need to understand what are the fundamental needs of both peoples, which are different, and what are the injustices that both people face. Because the options we have on the table is, number one side's going to exterminate the other. I don't ever see that happening on either side. Option number two is one side exiles the other, completely kicks everyone out. I don't see that happening on either side. Option number three is we continue the status quo of oppression, of suffering, of death and pain, which is clearly what we've been doing, unfortunately, for the past 75 years. And option number four, create a reality that fulfills the needs of both peoples, which is something that has never been tried. And I think if we look at how Palestinian society functions, they care less about national control, they care more about local control. If you go to the Kfarim, to the villages of Palestinians, you have that one family that is the ruling family. Let's say there's beef between two families, one person stole something, hit someone. Those two families will come to that main family, and that main family, the patriarch, the father, the grandfather, will give his decree, and that's what goes. So that's the real leadership of the Palestinians, and they're more tribal, they're more local-based than national-based. If you go to the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, the majority of Palestinians reject the Palestinian Authority, do not see Abu Mazen as their true leader, and want to run themselves on a more local level. Now for Jews, it's actually the opposite. If you go to cities in Israel, Tel Aviv, Herzliya, Kfar Saba, whatever it is, most people don't even know who the mayor of their city is. We care less about the local control. We care more about the national control. So these are things that are very important to understand how we have our needs in terms of how we govern ourselves. Now, I grew up a large percentage of my life in the US, and obviously the US was a country that was founded on an indigenous people's land. It's not comparable to what's going on there because Jews, Israelis, and Palestinians all come from this land, so it's not the same paradigm. But if we look at when the US created its country, in the models at least of how we were taught, it realized that there were problems. There were larger colonies, smaller colonies, and they were afraid that one colony would be too powerful, so it created a system of checks and balances, and it created an electoral system with an amendment system to the constitution, and it created a whole new system that was fit for what it wanted with its project. And if you look at the Declaration of Independence, you have many signatures, many great minds who had come together to build something that was what their vision was. Good or bad, that's how it happened. If you look at Israel, in 1948, we just got out of the Holocaust, out of 6 million being killed. My grandparents are the only survivors of their family. My entire line was wiped out. This is the trauma that we came in with. And of course, many other Jews were kicked out of their lands and had gone through traumas, and also Jews had always lived in the land. There was never a time in history without Jews there. So a lot of us were coming out of trauma, and the British just set up this system for us to fight each other. And unfortunately, in 48, we fought. So Israel never had that moment to think of what can we build here that would work for Jews and for Palestinians. They basically took the British parliamentary system. They changed the language to Hebrew. They changed the symbols with a Jewish star, and we ran with it. Yalla, let's go. And that is a system that works for a more homogeneous thinking society, like in Europe. In Jews, I'm sure you have Jewish friends. You have two Jews with 3 opinions. We're very opinionated people. And so that's not a system that works. And because of that, we can see elections happening several times a year even, because there's breaking of coalitions, and it's not a system that works for Jews, and it's not a system that works for Palestinians. So what I would like to do is to push my people forward with Palestinians as well, having us understand that we need to create a brand new system here that of course is a republic in the sense that the people have control over their leadership, but is a system that's built on honor, on respect, on justice, on equality, and that allows the Jewish experience to feel that we're living in a Jewish country, and allows the Palestinians to feel that they're living in a Palestinian country. And in my opinion, those aspirations do not contradict. I think there are hardline non-negotiables for both sides. We have to be honest with them. The same way I need to be honest about Jerusalem being the capital of this land, they need to be honest with us and saying that right of return for Palestinians is a non-negotiable. Now, when many Jews hear that, they're not against just the idea of Palestinians coming. The reason they're against, most of them, of the right of return for Palestinians is because right now they experience most Palestinians as their enemies. The average Palestinian that they see, at least on social media and on the news, are Palestinians that are against Israel. So why would we want to bring in population that is against our country? And also there's this idea of a demographic threat. If you bring in so many Palestinians, then all of a sudden you no longer have a Jewish democracy and you don't have a Jewish state anymore. But I think a fix to that, which is not even the reason why I got started in this work, is the tribes of Israel. For me, I started with this project because I realized that if the situation was flipped and this side of the family had come home and my side of the family was still suffering, wouldn't I expect them to come for us, to help us, to recognize us? And so that's what started for me. And over time, I've realized that we can never really be ourselves as Israel without all the Bani Israel, without all the tribes of Israel reunited back into the land. But if we were to allow the tribes of Israel to come back, Zera Israel, the seeds of Israel, the descendants of Israel, today about 500 million. Now, not all all of them are identifying as Israelites and practicing and connected to it, I would say about 20% are, and about half of them want to return to Israel. That's a population of 50 million people. And if we'd allow a space for Israelites to come back and also Palestinians to come back, there wouldn't be a threat in majority, and everyone could be able to live from the river to the sea in a free way. And so I think that that's the direction that we need to go towards. So I would definitely reject any model of a two-state solution. It is not what the majority of Palestinians nor the majority of Israelites want. I would also not say one state, because a one state implies the extension of the current model of the state of Israel onto the rest of the land, for which I'm very critical, and I think that must change as well. I would say one civilization. One civilization where we all have equality and focuses on building what we need in this land on both ends.
What about you, Rashad? What do you think?
Two things come to my mind primarily. First is, when we were guests, they brought a group of imams, a delegation of imams, into the land of Israel, and we saw a nice spectrum of the nation. We met political leaders, religious leaders, Arab Muslims. It gave me perspective. The organization that brought us, one of the themes that they kept reiterating to us, which I agree with, is that the solution is not going to be political. The solution has to be person to person. I just believe in that at a fundamental level. Even the story that you shared about your mother, the first thing that stuck out about that story on the bus is that you were playing with the children of this black woman. And as a child, you don't even think about people being different. They're just kids. Kids play with each other. That's what they do. And then the harshness of the bus driver, really savagery. In our religion, that would be called jahili, the age of ignorance in you. You're like an unevolved human. That's how we would see it. But here comes a black woman registering the injustice and coming to the defense of, I'm imagining, as you told the story, she didn't even know your mother. It's just something core that we all share. So human to human connection is essential. When we get together, it may take some time to warm up, but we soon find we all want the best future for our children. We all want to be in a safe neighborhood. We all want some of the same things. When you kind of get past that, you settle on that, then you're in a comfortable place to discuss differences. You're in a comfortable place to discuss the nuances that make you uniquely you as opposed to other than you. But you have that human basis. So that person-to-person contact is important. In other words, I think that the parties on the ground there in that land have to be more intentional on both sides to bring about the process of getting to know one another. I would also add, because there is a slight difference in the Jewish community, whereas you're considered Jewish, or you can be at least, and not necessarily be a practitioner of the religion. That's different in Islam. You know, you can't be ethnically Muslim. You can be Arab or Malaysian or Indonesian or West African, but you have to be practicing the religion and accepting the tenets. But nevertheless, I believe that if both sides would look again at their knowledge sources, the sources that they say are the basis for their life, if they look at those sources again with sober minds and clear hearts, they would be able to find guidance or solutions for this predicament. Because after all, even in the context of this discussion, politics have come up. Economics have come up sort of indirectly. A lot of man-made constructs. And as a person of faith, as a believer in my sacred text, and also we are commanded to believe in the books of those who came before us and in the prophets that came before us, we really see that the solution for the life of human beings, as God wants the life of the human being to be lived on the earth, we see it found in correct reading or pure reading, an innocent reading of our scripture, our sacred scripture. And I do believe that that has been ignored. It has been misused. On our side, you have sort of extremists on both sides who take the texts as weapons of destruction against the other. But that's not a pure reading. That's not an innocent reading. I think that the innocent reading and a sincere reading of the scriptural sources would really situate the hearts and the minds of the persons who hold to these traditions. It would situate them to find the help that they need to really live together in peace.
We hear words like propaganda and stuff like that. Can you both really address the dangers of the information? People are having a hard time trying to understand what is or what isn't. How do we, somebody that's on the outside, looking into this situation? Because this affects everybody, and I don't think a lot of people realize that worldwide how much of an issue this is and how much it's affecting us. One thing that stuck to mind was like Sean King, for example. you know. And this is a brother that has a lot of power because of his following and the things that he posts. And the dangers of that if he's not properly doing the research prior to igniting the emotion of people. I heard you both speak about the fact that you don't like the killings and you don't like how people are going about handling their business, but then you look in the comments and people are clapping. People are like, yeah, kill them, do this, do that. And it's really sad and it's sickening. What is the advice to people in regards to them scrolling and what their responsibility is?
It's a double-edged sword. I use social media to bring light, to showcase conversations of Israelis and Palestinians uniting, because it's much harder to say that this doesn't exist when you show it to people that it does. But there's also a space for divisive content and negative content, which is often, for some reason, promoted way more than the positive content. And there are pages like mine, for example, that have for 3 months now been shadow banned. You can't even find me on Instagram if you're not already following me. And for what? You know, who knows? I'm not getting a clear answer from Instagram, and there are many pages like me who tried to bring people together, and all of a sudden we find our pages being minimized in the public view. So what is really the interest of these companies behind pulling the strings? I want to agree with something that you said, that I don't think that the solutions are going to come from the top. They're going to come from the bottom up, grassroots solutions to our issues. Maybe one day there will be a politician that will want to do something, but it's not just the players that are the problem, it's the game. And so the game in Israel has to change, and the only way for that to change is by shifting the pop culture, starting with the younger generation that will create new leaders and have enough of an electoral body and powerful voice to be able to change the situation. In terms of Sean King, we have a few mutual people that we know, and there was actually an email exchange that was created offering Sean King to have a discussion with me. Nothing even recorded, just between individuals who are influential within this space. His first email was, of course, it would be an honor. And then afterwards, he just stopped responding. And unfortunately, I've seen many people on all sides that use their platform to project hate, cherry pick instances of suffering, let's say, when it comes to the Palestinians. I never saw Sean King talking about the thousands of Palestinians dying in the Syrian civil war, about the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians suffering in refugee camps in Lebanon and Jordan, Palestinians suffering under the Palestinian Authority or Hamas or on the border of Gaza and Egypt. It's only Palestinian suffering when it has to do with Israel, which is real and has to be talked about. And I talk about this all the time. But when you cherry pick instances of suffering to fit your agenda, remove all the context as to what actually happened, and you're talking about the what but not the why, you're talking about the effect but not the cause, and you're manipulating that in order to create this ammunition against another people and their identity. When you understand there is no zero-sum game solution to this, neither population will disappear, you're really just a product of being fuel for this ongoing fire of war. And there are many individuals who make their money and their popularity off of that, and unfortunately those are voices of darkness, in my opinion. And Zat Hashem, inshallah, we should empower more voices of light that believe in unity. And we don't have to agree on everything. Unity doesn't mean uniformity. It doesn't mean we all need to be the same. I look at each human being as a cell, and each tribe or group that we're a part of, or nation or religion, whatever it is, it's like an organ. And each organ is different. The body needs to know that the heart needs to be different than the brain, needs to be different than the liver. Every body part is different. We don't all need to be the same, but we need to all understand that we're all an extension of one, and use our differences to empower each other and work together for us to actually function. And so I think that's really how we need to view the correction of the world. There's this story, I believe it's Yellowstone Park, where they had hunted out all the wolves. And because there were no more wolves in the ecosystem, the bison could just graze freely without having to go from one field to the next. No one was hunting them. And so they would overeat the grass to its root. And eventually it killed the actual plant, so grass wasn't growing anymore. The bugs were dying out. The land was drying up. Birds wouldn't come. And the ecosystem was starting to be destroyed just from this one little piece that was missing. Scientists found that out. They reintroduced wolves. The bison started moving from one place to the next. Grass started growing back. The bugs came back, the mud came back, the birds came back. And so there was something that happened in the course of, let's say, species history, that we disconnected from the ecosystem we belong to. And we were the most conscious species, but also the most destructive species on this planet. We're the most aware of the destruction that we are very much so creating. As human beings, all of us around, we have to find out what are the wolves that we need to plug back in for this equation to work again. And I think if we focused on that, on micro examples and macro examples, we'd be able to move further. And that's the idea that I'd like to communicate with your audience.
As simple as this sounds, I would just encourage us Don't get your view of the world from social media. And we know that even in just common culture. You know, someone is posing in front of a Porsche with a bunch of money, and then he goes, after the filming is done, he takes it back to the dealership and turns the money back to the bank or something like that, or puts it back in the Monopoly bucket or whatever. So just understand that our media, the news media, is infotainment. That's how it's categorized.
Right.
In this world of constant bombardment with information from these sources, we have to really take charge of our senses, and we have to be very intentional about discovering truth. You may find a program like this, you may find Brother Rudy's YouTube channel, but at the same time, you may not, because you've been shadow banned. So what do? I encourage all people, let's just use the United States just to convey the point. Right. We share this country. The Christians are our neighbors. The Muslims are our neighbors. Buddhists are our neighbors. We should get to know them. In most of these established religious institutions now, they have offices that accommodate guests that want to know them for some type of interfaith or some type of exchange. In other words, we have to become more responsible as citizens. We have to actually make the effort to get to know one another. Reading is fundamental. We're the most informed. We have the most information at our disposal, but we seem to be the least curious. If we just turn off the dopamine hit in time, we can kind of sober up. That's really what we need. Social media is just a problem if you're looking at it for certain reasons. If you want to understand the world, if you want to make a responsible contribution in the world and be connected to others in the world, you can't depend upon that.
Because you both have a lot of knowledge, whether it's religion or politics or whatever's going on. What does that look like for the average person that they're not as deep? We don't have the capacity to do research out of a 1-minute reel. A lot of people are just like, I just want to watch this quick clip to get somebody to reading past the third paragraph or something like that. Because I know the fact that people are standing outside and making a lot of assumptions based on 30 seconds, but it could still be a false narrative. How do we go about getting somebody to actually take the time to meet a person, have a conversation with them, and get to know them, to understand, like, even though we look different or believe different, we might share more similarities than one might assume.
Well, we don't use the access that we have. You know, I speak to many Israelis who are full of rage and might have negative opinions towards Palestinians, towards Muslims, towards Arabs. And then I ask them, well, how many Palestinians do you know? And usually I get none, but I know enough.
That's crazy.
Right? So it's the fact that we don't engage with each other. You know, I wasn't raised with any hatred towards Palestinians, but I was also never raised with understanding their history, their culture, their identity, their experiences, their suffering. And the only way I was able to find that out for myself is by going out and doing that outreach, building relations, understanding, sitting with them. I think it's very important. For example, if you were to ever come into the land, you should meet both Israeli and Palestinian leaders, and also to be very careful with tokens, right? Because you'll have, let's say, a Palestinian that will only criticize the Palestinian side and will only parrot a pro-Israel narrative. That's not a representation of the Palestinians. Or you'll meet Jews that will take on any anti-Semitic, anti-Israel position and say, this is my position as a Jew. They don't represent our community. They're mouthpieces for just hearing what you want to say from the body, from the vessel of what represents on the outside of a Jew. So it's important to speak to the right people that truly represent their future, but not necessarily the people who are coming from a place of hatred, but more so a place of love and understanding that there is no reality where either of us disappear. So we need to start coming together. And there are enough individuals like that. And unfortunately, they're not usually in positions of power, because if they were, then we'd see a very different world. And I would also say that on the Israeli side, that we're actually able to have freedom of speech. And Palestinians don't. Put Gaza to the side, even in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. There is no freedom of speech. Whenever I create content with these individuals, I have to blur their faces and change their voices to protect their identity. And that's also another critique that I have of Israel. If a Palestinian attacks an Israeli, there's a consequence. The IDF would go in, find this person, arrest him for whatever reason that he did. Would there be a court case? And that would go to the legal system. But if a Palestinian kills another Palestinian, nothing happens. So I think we need to understand that with power comes responsibility, and you need to create a reality of justice for all. And there are many Palestinians that I know that could be thought leaders of their own communities and could give a different option than what Hamas is pushing out to the world, but they would need the help and the safety of those who are in power to be able to speak their mind and to share their voice.
It just has me thinking, because I debate all the time. I love a great conversation, but I feel like a lot of times people don't understand that even though somebody could be pro something but against something else, that could still be dangerous, because you need to still get the whole scope in regards to whatever the issue is.
Yeah, in terms of how do common people, the average everyday person, how do they access, how do they even know where to go to be properly informed? In my view, the reality is that they don't. So that makes persons in our position more obligated. The informed are obligated to the uninformed. So even as you mentioned earlier at the beginning, how you like to engage in controversial topics for the sake of bringing about healing and peace, we just need persons such as yourself to make that contribution, because other than that, I can't envision something other than something that's so idealistic that it's almost not real.
Yeah.
Everybody just, pick up a book. Right. That's not going to happen.
Right.
But I do believe that in this age of social media, we have the YouTube, we have the Instagram, we have the Facebook, TikTok. TikTok has its problems, but I think that persons who are interested in being properly informed, they have to really become more intentional and more productive in that regard. Because in all of these things, there are more good people than bad. Mm-hmm. I think people want peace more than they want conflict. So to use business language, there's a huge market for it. I think that this society that we live in has built itself upon a low estimation of human beings. Human beings, they want controversy, they want drama, and that's what they'll pay for. So let's invest in that. That's how social media is designed, to separate them into groups and keep them in their respective echo chambers. But I think that some of us should invest in the human being from a good lens. No, people want to hear good things, and people want to see things that give ease and comfort and peace to their soul. I think that we just haven't bet on that enough. And this type of work that you're doing in particular, I think we just need this to continue and more of it. If it continues, it'll influence others to do the same. And I think we'll be surprised at the type of positive ripple effect it will have. That's how we reach the common person. The common person is trying to just get home after work.
Yeah.
All they can deal with at that moment is perhaps that clip. But if the clip is put out from a good source, that's really the reach that we want.
But let's say we had the chance to get the nation and the Jewish community, or Israeli, black, however we want to look at it, if we can get them in a room and have the world watching, how would you respond?
You want to go first? I would take what Rudy said about the Palestinians and Jewish people. I would extend it to the globe. We share this globe, and we're not going anywhere. This earth is our home. One of the verses in our sacred text, the Quran, the earth is described as like a carpet and the heaven like a ceiling, to tell us that we have one living space, one home. And just like the physical home that you go to at the end of the day, you want it to be neat, you want it to be clean. If you're a parent, you want for the siblings to get along with one another. If you are a sibling, you want to get along with your siblings. You want to be protected. You want comfort, you want love, all of those basic things. Extend that out to the whole globe. We don't have to just anticipate heaven after we physically die. We can make the world a heaven, but to the extent that we can recognize that we're all members of one human family and we all share this planet as one home.
Speaking to Muslims and Jews, we also have to understand the audience we're speaking to and speak the language that they communicate in and resonate with. And us being spiritual people that have texts, there are stories from these texts that are in the same books. Although not all Muslims descend from Arabs, the ideology, the spirituality does descend from the house of Ibrahim. And there's the story of Isaac and Ishmael, two forefathers of our nation's people's spiritualities. Their relationship wasn't so great during their lives, but at some point something happens and they reunite. And it's actually in the death of Ibrahim that they come back together and realize that they both have a responsibility to fulfill the mission of their father. And so I would first start with this story that would have an understanding of both people's culture and their way of life. Obviously, if I'm speaking to an atheist, this is not something that they would resonate with. And I would also have both sides give an explanation of what their end goal is. And if you look at the end goal of Muslims, it's to create oneness in this world. And if you look at the end goal of Jews, it's to create oneness in this world. We actually have the same goal. How we go about it, there might be differences, but the end goal is the same. And if that is the goal, then maybe let's start uniting on that and figuring out how we could work together to eventually get there.
No, that's powerful, fellas. I appreciate you. And for me, I'm big on giving flowers, not waiting. So Rudy, Rashad, I think it's important, man, to just show love, give my blessings and peace and all of that wonderful stuff, man, because you both beautiful brothers. Thank you both for taking the time to sit here and just have a conversation and to hear each other out from the bottom of my heart. And, y'all both got a brother in me. Whatever's needed, however I can support, please let me know. Thank y'all for the work that you're doing. Keep mashing the gas. That'll be it. Appreciate y'all for tuning in. Get at y'all later.